Welcome to Episode 6 of this podcast series on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Now we've covered the characters, major themes, context and structure of the novel, it's time to take a closer look at each section in detail.
This episode we're going to be taking a close look at Captain Walton's first letters to his sister and how they set up the events of the novel.
If you haven't already read the novel, we would encourage you to do so now, as it will make it easier for you to engage with the analysis. At the very least, you should read the section we're discussing before continuing. We've already spoken a little about how Walton's letters work as a framing device for the rest of the novel. Through Walton, we're given an insight into the kind of man Frankenstein was before he created the monster. He is obsessed with enlightenment, progression, and the pursuit of genius. All of this is encapsulated in his desire to journey to the northernmost points of the world.
The fact that Walton is travelling to the North Pole is not just an ideological cue to us that he's an Enlightenment thinker, it's a visual one as well. The idea of light, and travelling to a place where it's light for days on end, appeals immensely to an Enlightenment thinker. He wants to go somewhere where nothing is hidden, and all can be known. Consider this quote from Walton to his sister.
What may not be expected in a country of eternal light? I may there discover the wondrous power which attracts the needle and may regulate 1,000 celestial observations that require only this voyage to render their seeming eccentricities consistent forever.
Render their seeming eccentricities consistent forever. This is the very core of Enlightenment thinking. That everything, no matter how unusual, has a rational explanation that you only need to discover. This is the exact thinking which led to Frankenstein attempting to create life from death. Walton summarizes this thought off with the following statement.
I shall satiate my ardent curiosity with a sight of a part of the world never before visited, and may tread a land never before imprinted by the foot of man.
This links up well with what we were saying last episode about the idea of mortal versus the divine. Walton feels none of the dread that a romantic thinker might upon going somewhere no person has gone before. More than anything, he is obsessed with new accomplishments, and it is that desire that drives him north.
Walton's desire for enlightenment comes from an urge to aid humanity and progress its collective knowledge. This makes him single-minded in his pursuit of knowledge. As he travels deeper into the unknown, he's aware of the beauty of his surroundings, rather than being overcome by the sublime, as a romantic thinker would be. At the same time, he feels a real urge for companionship, which becomes the driving reason behind these letters to his sister. Walton's physical description of the environment to his sister in these early letters is important because it sets up the sublime and beautiful nature of the environment he's journeying into. The sublime nature of the ice fields, and the beauty he encounters as well, makes this the perfect setting for him to recount the tale of Frankenstein and his monster.
Walton himself, however, struggles to experience the sublime at the beginning of the novel. He writes to his sister that, although he tries in vain to be persuaded that the pole is the seat of frost and desolation, he is unable to imagine it as anything other than a region of beauty and delight.
There, Margaret, the sun is forever visible, its broad disk just skirting the horizon and diffusing a perpetual splendour.
The captain's only moments of doubt come to him when he becomes aware of his own isolation. It is, after all, the reason he writes to his sister as regularly as he does. He writes to his sister how he has no friend on the journey, and fears what will happen if he becomes down while on the trip. Or as he puts it, no one will endeavour to sustain me in dejection. It is at these moments that the idea of the sublime creeps into the text, and creates a sense of discomfort.
This sense of isolation and a desire to feel some degree of intimacy with another runs throughout this novel. The monster feels it for both Frankenstein, his forbidden bride, and the de Lacy family. Frankenstein feels it for his love, Victoria, and Walton feels it for both his sister and Frankenstein. In fact, you could argue that many of the events of the novel would not have come about if the characters in it were satisfied with their isolation.
In fact, the story itself might not have even been told at all had the characters been happy in their isolation. It is only after Walton has rescued Frankenstein from the ice and worked to develop some companionship between them that Victor agrees to share his tale.
It's worth spending some time considering the appearance of Frankenstein in Walton's life and its parallels with another event later in the novel, namely the first sighting of Frankenstein's monster. When Frankenstein is first encountered by Walton's ship, it is in the sublime setting of the ice field, much like the monster is met in the shadow of Mont Blanc.
Much of the language used to describe him also has parallels with the physical descriptions of the monster later in the novel. Frankenstein, looked up by Walton, is described thus.
His limbs were nearly frozen, and his body dreadfully emaciated by fatigue and suffering. I never saw a man in so wretched a condition.
At this moment, at the beginning of the novel, Frankenstein has far more in common with the monster than humanity anymore. He is an outcast and subject of pity or even distaste. A quick comment here on structure. Having Frankenstein appear in such a bad way, in such a strange location, is an excellent hook for us as readers. We're already framing the future narrative with more questions. What happened to Frankenstein to make him so wretched? How did he get here? Who was the mysterious man in the distance? In creating these questions, Shelley is leaning into that great Gothic trope, the unknowable other. In doing so, she both makes us uneasy and hungry for more.
Walton, of course, feels none of these concerns. Rather, he's excited to have a new companion on his journey. In particular, he's drawn to Frankenstein because he seems to have all the markings of an Enlightenment thinker.
He is so gentle, yet so wise. His mind is so cultivated, and when he speaks, although his words are culled with the choicest art, yet they flow with rapidity and unparalleled eloquence.
At the same time, Frankenstein ignites Walton's unavoidable curiosity. He needs to know exactly how Victor came to be in such a poor state, and absorb the man's knowledge in the process.
He excites at once my admiration and my pity to an astonishing degree. How can I see so noble a creature destroyed by misery without feeling the most poignant grief?
Of course, this also makes Walton the perfect narrator for the story, as his interests are aligned with those of us, the readers, and therefore we can trust that he'll ask the questions we want answers to.
We, the readers, now have a method through which the mystery of Frankenstein can be revealed, namely Walton's letters. This method of epistolary storytelling is another great Gothic trope, and plays with the idea of letters being reliable to make the story of the monster more believable to us as readers. It also, in turn, keeps us far enough away from the truth that we can be kept in suspense until the very end of the novel, when we read Walton's final letter and the latest information.
A small note before we end. It's no coincidence that the novel begins with a communication and connection between two family members. From the first page, it's placed in our minds that this is a book all about being connected to someone else and being part of a family. That theme runs throughout the book. It's in Frankenstein's desire to return home and get married, in the monster's urge to become a member of the de Lacy family. You could very well argue that the core tragedy of the entire book is that its characters are constantly reaching out to one another for intimacy, only to be turned away. Keep that in mind as you read through the novel. Consider how that desire for connection triggers different events, and what that should mean to us as critical readers.
That's enough for this episode. Next time we'll be looking at chapters 1 through 3, so make sure to read them if you haven't already. Until next time, thanks for listening.